am Amy Vetter, and welcome to the Breaking Beliefs podcast. This valuable time is for you to pause in your day and go on your own self-journey. Discover the beliefs that are holding you back from living your best life at work and at home. Learn from the guests on this show as they share their inspirational stories on how they found ways to break internal beliefs that were no longer serving them. Because if you believe you can, you will. And our podcast begins now. Welcome to this episode of Breaking Beliefs, where I interview Kim Barnes from Barnes Team Media. She has spent 30 years on the air and now works with executives, entrepreneurs, speakers, and small business owners who want to improve their on-camera presence for video, virtual presentations, and media interviews. Kim was an award-winning reporter and news anchor for 15 years. Since leaving the news, she is also seen in corporate videos, commercials, and doing voiceover work. She has also taught TV news reporting at the University of Texas and works with her former sportscaster husband at Barnes Team Media. During my interview with Kim, she shares her journey from growing up feeling she had to be perfect to learning to build the confidence to figure things out and learn what is good enough along the way. If you enjoy this podcast, please share, review, and comment, and bring it to people so that they can also learn these lessons of how we break these belief systems to become better for the people around us. Enjoy this interview with Kim. Welcome to this episode of Breaking Beliefs. And today I'm with Kim Barnes. Kim, do you want to give a little background on yourself before we begin?
Sure. Gosh, yeah. Where do I start? I grew up in Houston. I moved there when I was 4. So I've been a lifelong Texan, I would say, although I wasn't born in Texas, but I got here pretty quick. But I grew up in Houston. And when I went off to college, went to the University of Texas in Austin, did my first job in Waco, moved back to Austin when I got married, and have lived here ever since. We've been in Austin a long time.
And you own a media company, correct?
I do. It's called Barnes Team Media. And it's actually, I started it about 4 years ago. And then my husband joined me about almost 2 years ago after, interestingly, he lost his job after 29 years as a sportscaster at the same station, which was kind of a rough thing. But it's ended up being, it's allowed us to be able to work together because we train really well together. And we're an interesting combination because he's an extreme introvert, which you wouldn't necessarily ever imagine if you saw him on television. And
a lot of entertainers are. Which is interesting. Yeah,
it is interesting. And then I'm an extrovert. So we kind of feel like we can pretty much help anybody because whichever end of the spectrum, or if you're in the middle, we can help you. But we love doing coaching and training together. And it's been really fun for us to be able to work together and share all of our, if you start adding it together, more than 60 years of experience, which is just makes it sound really old. So, but it's been really fun.
Awesome. Well, we love to just share stories on here and kind of learn your path to where you are today and how you're helping people. And, a lot of the reason we become entrepreneurs or have businesses is purpose and passion from, things that we grew up with, belief systems that we either hold on to or things we've, observed over time and have said, you know what, that's not serving us. And we need to do it a little bit different. So would love to start from your beginning. You said you started out in Houston. Maybe you can give a little background on your family.
Sure. I grew up in Houston. We moved there when I was 4. And I have a younger brother who's a couple years younger than I am. And then my mom and my dad, they divorced when I was in high school. But we were pretty traditional family, I guess, kind of growing up. Interestingly, I think that I never really would have said that I was an entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. Really, like if you ask me now, has it always been your dream to own your own business? And I don't know that that's necessarily something I've always been driven to do. But it's funny when I look back and realize, wow, I did run a snack bar at the neighborhood pool when I was in 5th grade with a friend. And of course, our moms helped us because I wanted to buy a stereo, and they said they would pay for half and I had to come up with the other half. And so I feel like I've always been a little bit scrappy in that way, where I knew that if I wanted something, I needed to work for it. And while I said we were a pretty traditional family, there were some, my dad was an alcoholic. And so there were challenges that came from that. And he had really high expectations, really high expectations. And so while that's been something that in many ways has been a challenge, because when you have those expectations held, you feel like you can never meet them. But on the other hand, looking back, I do see that a lot of that gave me drive and gave me the gumption to try things and to do things and to make things happen.
Right.
I don't know that I always, sometimes I didn't necessarily always go in it with the intention of not necessarily of knowing exactly what the end result was going to be, but and that comes to when I think about what I decided to major in college, and we can talk about that. But that was kind of a funny situation. But I think that drive has made me think, okay, I can do things. And, I joke about that when I started working regularly in 8th grade at the neighborhood pharmacy, to be able to make extra money. And I remember them saying at the time, you might want to start saving up, even in 8th grade for a car when you turn 16. And I remember thinking, okay, fair. So I started saving up, but I still remember walking into my 16th birthday party, which ended up being a surprise party, and opening our gift. And I really thought that maybe they were kind of kidding, that maybe that maybe I really would actually get a car for my 16th birthday.
Right.
And instead, when I opened that electric typewriter, which dates me a lot, I remember thinking, oh, yeah, I guess they weren't kidding.
Yeah, I really did have to save for this.
I do really have to pay for the whole car. And so, fortunately, because I had been saving up and my mom helped me finance it, if you will, but I was able to get a car, but it was, I paid for it. And so, I think that there were definitely lessons learned that if you want something, if you want something, you got to make it happen.
Mm-hmm. So maybe you can give me a little background on your dad and your mom. So let's start with your mom, because probably your dad has a little more story there. But so what was your mom a stay-at-home mom? Did she work, or what was her background?
She was actually, had a degree in physical education and was a PE teacher.
Okay.
She was a fantastic tennis player all through high school, and played tennis until she was in her 70s. And so that was before I was in the picture. But when they first got married, she was a PE teacher that helped my dad put him through law school as a PE teacher. And then she stayed at home with us when we were really little, but she started teaching tennis because that's what she was good at. So she taught tennis lessons at the YMCA, and I remember going with her. And then somewhere in elementary school-ish, she started selling real estate. And so I remember, going into the office back in the day when you had to go to the office to look in the MLS book, to go look at listings and all of that. And I remember sitting in the car while she would have to go in and do a showing and that kind of thing. So I always, I guess, saw her sort of fitting in work alongside of other things. So I think that, looking back now, that was a lot of what I did when my kids were little as well, is trying to figure out, how do I still make a living, but be able to not have it negatively impact them.
Right. And have that flexibility.
And she's always just been, my biggest cheerleader. You can do, you can do anything, and just has always been encouraging.
So it sounds like, so she helped your dad become a lawyer, by working during that time. So he became an attorney, I guess, or what?
He did. And they were both at the University of Oklahoma, which was where they both went to undergrad. And then my dad went to OU law school. And then his first job moved us to Colorado Springs. So I was born, I think I was 6 weeks old when when he moved, and he worked in the district attorney's office in Colorado Springs for a little bit of time. And then we moved to Houston when I was 4. And at that point, he went into the trust division of a bank. And so he worked in that for a long time, and then kind of switched careers and did some other things that just were a little bit, he just got tired of being a trust officer.
So when you said he was an alcoholic, when did you start noticing that in your life?
Probably he was
Hmm.
very high functioning. So probably nobody else would have necessarily noticed it.
Right.
But it was frankly about the time when my mom said, I think we need to go to Al-Anon. And I was like, what? And at that time,
How
this
old
was,
were you?
I think I was in high school,
Okay.
and it was super embarrassing because at that time people weren't as open.
Yeah, and I think so, similar to you, I've had addiction in my family with a family member. And when you talk about Al-Anon, that was always kind of I feel like a sore point in our family of how it was used in different ways by the people that supported my family member. And I think the one thing that doesn't get discussed enough, when you've lived a life with people that have an addiction and it is a disease, and it takes a while when you're a member of a family and realizing it's a disease, because when you don't have it, you're like, why can't you just stop,
Right.
and
Right.
and so I know that took a while, but I think the hardest part is, for when I look back at all those things, is like the terror it creates in the family, and the focus is on the person with the addiction, but not on supporting the people that are supporting the person with the addiction. And like you said, you can feel embarrassed, or everyone kind of responds to it differently. And because each person's responding to it differently, it causes strife
Mm-hmm.
between how each person's dealing with it, dealing
Right.
with the person, or
Yeah.
or taking it in, right?
Yeah. So I only remember even going like once or twice. So I
Yeah.
don't think we went back because again, it didn't have the same kind of like I feel like now more there's the like you can do it, and there's that
Right.
camaraderie, and there's that
Right.
shared experience, if you will.
Yeah.
And I think and maybe too it was just my age, and because I was held to really high expectations, there was you didn't want anybody to think there was anything wrong.
Right. So and I think like most families that, and just like most family things are private, there's an outside brand
Mhm.
and an inside, reality, which is hard. And we went through the same thing of, especially, my mom being like, well, I don't want people thinking of us like this, or, or that sort of thing, where I remember in my head, I was like, but this is just who we, like, this is what's happening. Like, and I didn't want to hide it. But I think it's an important distinction you're talking about, is like, you can have someone that is causing that kind of emotional pain that, you know, maybe not intentionally, but it's just who they are, right? But then at the same time, you're trying to please them. So how did you correlate that in your head
It
when
was
you're
really it's
frustrated at the same time?
it's really hard. It's really hard. And I think for me, in many ways, it was distancing made it easier.
Hmm.
And I think that when I went off to college, it's kind of that sort of a natural separation point anyway, where you're kind of off doing your own thing. And thinking about back when I was in college, it was, long distance costs money. And there was, we didn't have cell phones. And so you didn't necessarily even interact and talk to your parents as much
Right.
anyway, just even with a great relationship, just because it was much harder. You had, I guess we had answering machines, but
Right.
it was just so much harder to connect. And so you might
Mhm.
talk to your parent, once a week or whatever.
Right.
And it was rough because I think he had bigger challenges, frankly, after they divorced
Hmm.
than we had actually experienced even
Right.
while they were still married.
Sure, because there was a person that was kind of taking it on, versus when he's alone to kind of deal with it. Uh, so the two things, with that, is what I've heard is, you've got these high expectations you're trying to please, and then at the same time, you're having to bootstrap and say, I'm responsible for myself.
Mhm.
So how did you see that evolve, like once you got into college?
I think it continued to be by that point, I wasn't as concerned about him being proud of me, if that makes sense, because he
Hmm.
wasn't, he frankly had kind of distanced himself and really wasn't part of my everyday or regular
Hmm.
life, partly by his choice. And just some other things as well. But I think that, but that created financial challenges
Right.
because he wasn't as involved. And so, it meant that I knew that if I wanted to be able to do some of the things that I wanted to do, that I would need to get scholarships and I would need to apply and I would need to, do the things that I could in my career. And I worked every spring break and over summers and, things like that so that I could continue to be able to do the things that I wanted to do. And I always just sort of had the attitude of, well, I'll just have to figure it out. I'll just work a little harder. I'll just work a few more hours and that kind of thing. And balancing that along with having decided that I wanted to be a reporter and knowing the things that you had to do to kind of want to go down that path, because, in some ways it's, at least at that time, it's one of the most competitive things that you can do because it's everybody and their dog wants to be, a television reporter.
Right.
And so, so I think on the one hand, I came in with, interestingly, a lot of confidence in the ability of being able just to make things happen, even though probably internally I might not have had as much of that internal confidence as I exuded, but I exuded a ton of confidence and just let's make this happen, and not ever really thinking that it might not happen for me. But for college, I just knew that financially I needed to make things happen. And my mom was always as supportive and generous as she could be. And I know sacrificed a lot so that we could do some of the things that we wanted to do.
Right.
But I was just thinking the other day about a story when I took my very first journalism class, or television journalism. We actually had to audition to be able to get into the broadcast sequence at the University of Texas. You could be a journalism major, but if you wanted to do broadcast journalism, you had to audition. And so once you got through that audition and made it into the program, if you will, there were 12 of us in our first class because it's upper division. It's very small and it's very hands-on. And I still, and it's funny because there's a lot of things that I don't remember, but I remember very specifically sitting in that class and our professor, Dr. Anderson, I still remember him saying, I want you to look around the room because half of you will likely never get a job in television journalism. Never get a job, which is, what a kind of harsh and bummer thing to tell people when we had to audition to get into this program. And obviously that's what we think we want to do. But I kind of remember having this thought of looking around the room and thinking, well, gosh, I feel so bad for them because in a weird way, it never occurred to me that it wouldn't be me, that would be me, because I just knew that I would work hard enough to make it happen. That makes sense.
Oh yeah.
And so in a weird way, and what's kind of funny about that is that while I had so much confidence, obviously being able to get a job in television, and I did all the internships and did all the things that you need that, help you along that path. It was funny because I think it was after I got my first job and actually started doing the work daily that you realize, wow, this is pretty tough. And this is hard. And so probably I had more confidence applying for my first job than I did potentially my second job, because I knew that on any given day, it is hard. There's a lot of expectations, there's a lot of deadlines, there's a lot of stress, but fortunately, I guess having that confidence going in made it so that I was, I just did all the things and followed, the path that I thought would be the straightest, if you will, to be able to get my first television job.
And I think it's important to reflect on the things that give us confidence. So if you can look back now, part of it might just be our chemical makeup of, who we are when we're born. But, what do you think are the things that drove that for you?
I mean, some of it could have come from a place of trying to prove myself, which maybe isn't necessarily the most positive reason, if that makes sense, that just feeling like I need to prove that I can do this.
Yeah.
And I also just...
Who did you need to prove that you could do it for? Yourself or for somebody else?
Probably my dad. Probably just thinking of, I can, and again, not in a, or maybe I can, maybe there wasn't even, maybe it was just a collective, I can show them. And not that I ever had, I think that mostly would come from people that maybe felt bullied or, let that kind of thing. And I don't feel like that was really that I ever had that in my life where, that I felt like oh, people are, discounting me and don't think I can do it and that kind of thing.
Right,
So I
right,
don't think
right.
it was really that, but I remember doing the Berkman test when I was in
Yeah,
high
I
school.
did that too.
Yeah, which was very
Yeah,
insightful. A friend of mine's dad was a facilitator. And so I thought, oh, this would be interesting to see kind of what I
yeah.
want to do. I thought I wanted to be a doctor going into college. And we took the Berkman test and he said, it was very sweet and love this man. He was, one of my best friend's dads. And he said, I'm not telling that you can't be a doctor. All I'm just going to tell you is that based on your, results from this test, it's not necessarily the thing that's going to come most naturally to you.
Right.
And I said, well, but that's what I really want to do. And he said, again, I'm not saying that you can't do it, but the qualities that would make you a good doctor are probably like fourth or fifth on your list. And, and I still remember this, persuasive was my number one. And I think they've changed what they call things
Yeah.
because my daughter has done it now. But it was persuasion, which was like teaching and sales and things like that. And I remember thinking, well, I don't really want to do that. I want to be a doctor. So I went to the University of Texas kind of in an undecided, but with the path of thinking I wanted to be a doctor. And I remember thinking after my first chemistry class, yeah, I don't really like science that much. And I did fine in it, but I just remember thinking, yeah, I don't think it's worth going to school for 10 years after college just to prove that I could be a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's probably a great reason to become a doctor. It's just because I can just show you that if I want to, I could, And so it was then that I saw some older girls in my sorority with their tape recorders because they were in this radio class that is part of the broadcast journalism sequence, again, dating me. And I remember thinking, now that's really interesting. You get to ask questions. You get to be nosy. This is awesome. I love knowing things. And it's funny looking back that in many ways that persuasion on my Berkman is exactly what I did, because as a reporter, you're gathering information and then you're teaching it to other people.
Yes. Well, and I think kind of by luck for you to take that test, because I know, I didn't have any personality test I took, I did not rank anywhere. And the only thing that came up for me was tattoo artist. Oh. So, so that wasn't giving me much guidance. Yeah. But I think the good thing was that was in the back of your mind. So when you took those classes, you were actually observing yourself versus I think a lot of people at that age just say, for me, I was going to be a CPA and that's just what I was going to be. I didn't question it, and to have someone kind of just put that in your head where it's like, well, maybe I should see how I'm feeling about this as I'm going through it is kind of a stroke of luck. Yeah. While you're in college. So you didn't have to make that change later.
Yes, because it would have been so hard, especially when you're beating against something that really isn't what you're either naturally good at. Yeah. Or that you really, really have such a desire or drive to do.
Right. Yeah. So your media career, how do you think, so you kind of built this bootstrapping confidence. That's the way I'm kind of looking at it. How do you think it helped you in your career as you move through it?
Well, I think it served me well because it's a very competitive industry. Everybody and their dog wants to do, would want to do that. And that's why the pay is so terrible. That's when I learned how to use triple coupons was in my first television news job because I made so little money. Right. I mean, truly, my husband in his first television job, he was part-time for 20 or 30 hours a week and literally minimum wage with a college degree. Wow. It's crazy. So, even though minimum wage was a lot less now then, but even if you had minimum wage now, it's still, you can't really survive that way. He actually waited tables in between the time he graduated from college and was looking for a sports job because he wanted only sports. And when he took his first job as a reporter, he actually took a huge pay cut from being a waiter. So I think that exactly. So I think just having that drive to this is what I want to do and I can prove that I can do it definitely served well because it is such a competitive industry and you have to really, really want it. You have to be willing to go to a small town, do grunt stuff, work terrible shifts, work. My first Thanksgiving out of college, I was at work in the little bureau office eating chili cheese Fritos and a Diet Dr. Pepper, for
Right.
Thanksgiving. So with my photographer, and so I think that, just having that sort of drive, if I want it, you have to work hard to do it. Definitely served well.
Where did it get in your way?
I think sometimes trying to force things.
Mm-hmm.
And or I think also just that perfectionism that came from wanting to prove yourself also means that you want it to be perfect, or at least in my case.
Mm-hmm.
And so that has been, and continues to be, just an ongoing struggle, because I think that when you're used to wanting things to be perfect,
Mm-hmm.
and when there's a lot of criticism, potentially, if you're not, it makes, and I don't know, some of it, I think it's, I hate to always just blame it on, it's because of this,
Right.
but I also just naturally, I have a very critical eye, which when you're a proofreader or a copywriter or something where details, if I was a brain surgeon, those details and that attention to detail, that really matters. You need that critical eye. Now, as a parent, having that critical eye is tough, and even as a business owner, or, even when you're doing stories and you're doing on-air work, or you're a news anchor and you're, trying to pull together or producing shows, and you're maybe not always happy with the story that somebody else does, then that's tough, because, you can end up wasting a lot of your own energy on things that you can't control. And it just takes a lot of the joy out of just doing and being.
Right. So what do you do to, now that you've observed that as a habit in your life, or something that naturally your brain goes toward, when you notice that happening, what do you do?
Well, I think the first thing is just acknowledging it,
Mm-hmm.
and just realizing what's happening so that you can choose a different thought.
Right.
Because that sometimes that's all it takes. And just also, I think, just knowing that if I'm doing the very best that I can, then that's enough.
Mm-hmm.
Easier said than done sometimes, for sure. And then, and I have a super strong faith in the fact that I, am having a constant dialogue, during the day of, I don't want to, take these thoughts away, or just, help me focus on what I do want and not what I don't want. So I think it's, some of it is just being conscious of it when it creeps in, because a lot of times that's what happens, is that you don't even notice it, and you get down this rabbit hole. And especially as a parent, I think that, I have to just really, before I have a conversation, sometimes just okay, just give me the right words, so that I pause and just give me the right words so that I can be supportive and yet share whatever it is that I need to share.
Mm-hmm. So, and I know with a lot of leaders, this can be a really big struggle, is well, they would have done it my way, it would have been perfect. They did it their way, and it's not what I would have done. Yeah. How do you get okay? When you're using the example, someone else does something, it's not perfect, and you have to go with it. So how have you moved through to be able to not micromanage?
It is really, that is an ongoing discussion. That is an ongoing discussion of I hear that word, you're micromanaging. And I'm like, okay, yes, I am. I think that sometimes I just have to remember that if it's something that I don't have time for, or that I know I'm not good at, then I just have to trust and be grateful that somebody else did it.
Yes, I love that. Be grateful.
Yeah, be grateful that I didn't have to do it. Yeah. And that somebody else made it, and or that it just, somebody else made it happen, where if I got stuck in my perfectionistic ways, it likely still wouldn't happen.
Right.
My husband he is so funny, because he is a boom, get it done.
Yeah.
He just, and he doesn't, and he's such a great mixture of, hard work and do a good job, but not get held up in it being perfect to get started. And so, there's a funny story. One time we had, when we had just done an addition, and I wanted to get the playroom blue, and I had this really great color. I went to the fancy paint store, and I got the primer, and I got the paint, and, we had it all ready to go. And of course, it already had been weeks since we bought the paint, and I just hadn't had time to tape it all up and do all this stuff and get it done. And my husband kept saying, "When are we going to do it? When are we going to do it?" And I said, "Oh, I don't have time right now. I don't have time right now." And so it just kept getting put off because I couldn't think of the time to get it all set up perfectly so that we'd have time to do it. And then there was a day where I had a freelance assignment that I did for one of the TV station that I used to work for. I've done a ton of sponsored content for them, gosh, in the last 15 years. So I had an all day project. And so I come home and the room has been painted because he just was like, "I'm tired of waiting on you to do it because it's never going to happen if I wait for you to do it." But the funny part is that I noticed the two cans of paint, and I had, again, one that was the primer because it's a dark color, and then one was the paint. And I looked at it and I picked them both up, and the paint was still full. The primer was empty. And I said, "Oh," I said, did you paint both coats with the primer?" He was like, "Huh, yeah, guess so." I was like, "Oh, okay." And of course, there was a part of me that was like, "Oh my gosh, I paid so much money for the actual paint that
right, yeah.
never going to be," and it never saw the light of day. It never made it. But I had to stop and go, "Okay, well,
good enough.
The room is blue."
Yeah.
And okay, it's done. Yeah. But so like those are the kind of funny examples where he
and when if you would have gone to redo it and all those other things, it would have made him feel like, you have to be considerate of that other person's feelings too.
Yeah, that's hard. Yeah. There was also the beta fish story, but that was a whole nother one with the kids came home with party favors of beta fish, which is a terrible idea.
Yes, exactly.
Don't send live animals.
Yeah, exactly.
Party favor. So I had to go to work because I was anchoring weekends then. And so I had to go to work after the party. And so Mike took the kids I said, "We'll take them to the pet store and, we didn't have any stuff. So get the little bowls and blah, blah, blah." So they call me and they are so excited. I did a little research, while I was at work just to see, I don't know, I hadn't had a fish since I was a kid. And so they call me and the kids are all excited. They're, "Oh my gosh, we got the bowls. We had to get their beta fish. We had to get 2, blah, 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 blah." And we put them in the water. And I said, "Oh, did you dechlorinate the water?" And they said, "Oh, no." I said, "Oh, okay. Well, I guess we'll see how hardy they are. And they might be dead in the morning." And sure enough, we wake up the next morning and one is dead and one is alive. So one was super tough and the other one had to be, of course, so then we had to go buy another beta fish because but anyway. So again, he's a just get it done, get it done.
Right, exactly. So. But the attention to detail. So I think that's why we need our opposites a lot of times, right?
Yes. So he often, I help slow him down sometimes.
Yes.
To where we don't act too quickly, but he also pulls me along to where things actually happen.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
So, with what you do, you now have your own business helping people with video training and media training. I think a lot of people that listen to this podcast, have instances where they need to be on video or they need to speak to reporters and so forth and articles. And a lot of what you've talked about is this perfectionist thing that I feel when I talk to a lot of people in my industry, it can get in the way of just doing it, like what you're talking about, right? And you struggle with that personally. So how do you bridge that gap when you're working with people to try to help them feel comfortable when they're trying to be perfect at the same time? And then it doesn't create, the kind of interview or video that they want.
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest thing to remember and the thing that we tell all of our students and our clients is that it's never going to be perfect because something's going to happen. The lighting's going to be off. The audio is bad one day. Maybe you're just off a little bit. Your brain's not thinking in the way that it maybe isn't firing on all cylinders on that given day. So it's never going to be perfect.
Right.
However, what are the things though that we can do to set ourselves up for success as best as possible, whether it's practicing ahead of time, especially in this virtual world, knowing what does our environment look like and how are we setting ourselves up? Are they going to be able to hear us well? Do I have a window behind me so that they can't even see behind me so that they can't even see me? I'm just a silhouette. Right. What are the things that we can do? What are the things that we can do to set ourselves up for success? So we work a lot with that and also building the confidence in, when you can know what to expect, that often when you know what to expect, that can often
take a pause a moment.
Yeah.
Thank you. Pause it.
Okay.
Cool.
we believe that when you know what to expect, whether it's for a media interview or just even creating your own videos, or frankly, just showing up for virtual presentations and virtual meetings, when you know kind of what to expect, that can build your confidence. So we do a lot of, I feel like, confidence building, because by sharing tips and tricks from all of our years of experience, we're going to be able to help you anticipate and know what kinds of questions they might ask, or what are the things that you need to be thinking about when you are interacting virtually. If you're an executive and you're having to present to your whole team, or we worked with an executive recently who was having to do ribbon cuttings virtually. So he was having to do videos that were then going to be used as kind of the ribbon cutting. So
Right.
I think that so much of what we can do by sharing all of this information and helping them practice and hone their skills and give them feedback can help build that confidence, so that it doesn't feel so intimidating.
Right.
Because it is awkward to talk to the camera.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
For sure. It's
My
just
life.
not natural. Yeah.
Well, cool. So, thank you so much for sharing the stories that you have. I'd like to close out each podcast with just some rapid fire questions. So, you get to pick a category. So, family and friends, money, spiritual, or health.
I'll take family and friends for 200, Alex.
Okay. And that dates us.
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay. Things or actions that I don't have that I want with my family and friends.
I'd say more time and more experiences, especially in the day that we're living now, where it's much more difficult to be able to spend time with friends.
Yeah.
I think is hard, and fortunately, our family is close by, so we're able to spend time with our immediate family. But I just think having more experiences with them as well. We used to do these crazy family road trips when my kids were younger. My husband is Chevy Chase from Vacation. Have you seen the largest peach in Ashburn, Georgia? Yes, we have. So we and those were such great bonding experiences and so fun. And wanting, just not being able to have kind of those experiences. One, as the kids get older, it's harder, and
Right.
also in this day and age, it makes it hard too.
Things or actions I do have that I want with my family and friends.
I would say, especially within our family, we're just, it's, my husband and we have two kids, a boy and a girl, and they are extremely close. And we are as a family really close. And so I love that, the family jokes and the family things like that I'm so grateful for.
Awesome. Things or actions I don't have that I don't want to happen with my family and friends.
I would say with family, extended family, we don't really, there's no crazy uncle. There's no, we don't have anybody in the family that we have challenges or issues with. So I think just the fact that everybody gets along, and,
Yeah.
that we have just we're, even our extended family is small, but everybody, gets along, and no crazy things going on.
And you want to protect that.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Things or actions that I do have that I don't want with my family and friends.
I'd say just in potential. I'd say that just from my husband losing his job 2 years ago, and building a business, that just creates some stressors financially, and just other stressors as you're trying to build a business. So I think that
Right.
it'd be nice not to have kind of that stress that goes along with it. Although there's fun parts about building a business as well, but that's sometimes a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we close up, is there anything we didn't say that you wanted to say, or any big takeaway you want to make sure people leave this conversation with?
I guess in some ways, having this conversation was so kind of, brought a lot of things to light, even for me, that I hadn't maybe thought of in certain ways before. And so I think maybe it's sometimes thinking about even the things that have been negative in your life, how can those also be something that can have a positive?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think, we all have those experiences. We've all been through hard things. And how do we make that, isn't there a song or something, what kills you makes you stronger, or whatever it is. But, what is it that we can take those? Because as I used to always tell my kids, and they got tired of hearing this, but, explanation, not an excuse. And
Right.
so certainly, while I look back and think, yes, I can explain a few things of probably some of the perfectionism and where that comes from and all of that. It still doesn't, it's not something I can use as an excuse.
Right.
So, thinking
I love that. Yes.
Yeah, it explains things, but
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't mean that I want to stay
Right.
there and
Right.
use as an excuse for things
And a
moving
lot of
forward.
people do.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
And it,
that's kind of even the premise of this podcast is, in my life, so many people have said, well, it's because this happened to me or that happened to me. And there's a point in your life where it's like, okay, that happened to you. Now you got to work on yourself so that you don't
exactly.
repeat the pattern. Right. And that's all of
Exactly.
our responsibility, not to harm others.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And and we just, I love being able to hopefully help people because of the things that I've been through or that our family's been through that, hopefully it helps somebody else see that there is light at the end of the tunnel and there is, even when things don't end happily, if you
Mhm.
will, but that you can learn from that and grow from that and use that as you move forward.
And there's other gifts that come with the family that you have today because of it,
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
right?
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story and being so honest with us and vulnerable as well. It helps all of us think about our own stories and grow with you as well. So thank you.
Thanks for having me.
And now for our mindful moments with this interview with Kim Barnes. There were so many points in this interview that I related with Kim. And also, Kim did share with me that she's never shared some of these stories with others and publicly. So I really appreciate the vulnerability that Kim had for not only sharing this story, but also being open to helping others understand how we all grow from hard things that happen in our lives, but not use it as an excuse for everything that might happen negatively going forward. We can look at these things that happen in our life, whether we've had, some sort of trauma, such as having addiction in our families or for ourselves, and use that to blame when things go wrong in our lives. Or we can look at the lessons we learn along the way and how they help us to improve ourselves and make us stronger for the future. And that was one of the big things that Kim talked about was even though she had these hard stories and experiences with her father, that there was another positive that she learned from these experiences was all about how to have the confidence to be able to create the life that you want and also to bootstrap when you need to, when the finances aren't there for the things that maybe you look at other people and they're able to get help that maybe you can't get the help with, that there's always a way if we are innovative and figure out the hard work that we need to put in order to accomplishment. And whether it was from her having the snack stand when she was younger or saving up for her car, what it taught her is as she had challenges going through college and her career, that she knew she was able to figure it out. And those are the things when we can reflect back on our past and see when we were able to realize that all that we needed was inside of us. And when we can pull from those stories and really recognize what are those things that taught us that we can do it. And we don't have to look for outside approval in order to have those accomplishments. And I love that one story that she talked about when the professor had said only 50% of you are going to make it into having real jobs in broadcasting. And instead of getting beaten down by that comment, instead she sat back and said, wow, I feel sorry for half of this room that I will be able to accomplish that. And I think that's a really important thing when we talk about mindset and resilience, that a lot of times we can hear things that actually drive negativity in our mind or self-doubt. Instead of stepping back and saying, well, why do I have to buy into that? That based on my prior record, I am an accomplished person, that I do work hard, and I know what it takes because I have the drive and the skills in order to accomplish what I want to accomplish. No one can do that for me. And when we look to the outside for excuses, maybe of I didn't make it into a broadcasting job because that professor said that only 50% of us were going to make it and I believed it, then I can use that as an excuse for why that didn't happen instead of looking internally and saying, what did I need to do different in order to achieve the goals that I do? And when she talked about acknowledging some of the things that were maybe weaknesses for her, but also a positive, where we can look at perfectionism as both, right? It's a way of controlling your environment, but also how do I not let that affect others or create an energy that I don't want it to create? Where she talked about, I have to acknowledge when I'm in that perfectionism mode, that I have to choose a different thought and know that I can do the best that I can, and that's enough. That I don't have to be perfect or overdo, because that actually gives us a diminishing return. And that it's important to constantly recognize that in our day. So if we feel like we have certain traits that we need to recognize or observe, it is important that we give ourselves space to do that, to pause in our day and understand when we have to observe when those types of habits or patterns are coming up for us and what we need to do, whether it's mantras, whether it's shifting our energy through yoga or exercise or reading or listening to music, to shift our energy away from that recurring thought or habit so that we can get back to our intention of what we want to do. So that we're not thinking about negatives in our life, but instead turning these negatives into positives and getting back to making sure that we don't ever use our past stories as an explanation for why we behaved the way that we did and use it as an excuse. Instead, that we are owning up to who we are and being really real about the things that we need to do in our lives so that we're better for the people around us. So I hope you enjoyed this episode with Kim. I really, again, want to thank her for being so open and honest about her story. It always helps all of us to share and to reflect. And even when we go back through these stories, we always have an epiphany or some sort of observation. So if you think this episode would help someone else you know, please share it with them, subscribe to the podcast, and review it so more people can share in these stories and experiences that are also helping you. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to the Breaking Beliefs podcast. I hope you will take a moment to pause before entering back into your day to reflect on this podcast and note 1 to 2 actions you are inspired to do from today's conversation that you could incorporate into your life. To read the full blog and listen back to this episode or any other, you can find them at www.amyvetter.com/Breaking Beliefs podcast and related videos on my YouTube channel. For daily inspiration, follow me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Amy Vetter CPA. I hope that you will choose to like this and subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and more so that you can join us for more inspiration on our next episode.